everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon, this morning, this evening, to talk about experiences evaluating Changemaker education. As just mentioned, I'm Hattie Dupleshin. I work as an education evaluation specialist, but have connected with a few of you over the years in my former role as evaluation specialist for Ashoka U. And so really excited to be here with you all today. I'm going to read my land acknowledgement and then excited to introduce our panelists. So I'm on the traditional territory of the Lenape Nation. The Lenape are considered one of the oldest tribes in the Northeast United States region and have been in existence for over 10,000 years. The translation of Lenni Lenape is original people. I'd like to acknowledge and pay my deep respect to the Lenape people, past, present, and future. I recognize the many injustices that were forced upon them and other Indigenous communities. By acknowledging the land and the people of the Lenape Nation, I hope to take one small step towards reconciliation. I was really excited to introduce our panelists today, who are all leading really innovative evaluation work within the context of their own unique campuses. And so I'll pass it over to them to share a quick introduction and their own land acknowledgement. Maybe Abby, you can go first, and then Noah, and then Sandra.
Thank you. I'm here in Portland, Oregon, which is the land of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Tumwater, Wotlala bands of the Chinook, and the Tualatin and Kalapuya, and many other Indigenous nations. Today, many of our ancestors are represented by the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde and Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. This is a complicated land acknowledgement in the Pacific Northwest because there were so many tribes who are here. Their relationship with this land continues to this day. We offer gratitude for the land itself, for those who've stewarded it for generations, and for the opportunity to study, learn, work, and be in community on this land. We acknowledge that our university's history, like so many others, is fundamentally tied to the very first colonial developments in the area, and we respectfully acknowledge and honor past, present, and future Indigenous students.
Hello, everyone. My name is Noah Isserman, and I'm here in Urbana-Champaign, Illinois, which is the ancestral lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Mascoutin, Ottawa, Sauk, Muskogee, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. As a land-grant institution, the University of Illinois has a particular responsibility to acknowledge the peoples of these lands, as well as the histories of dispossession that allowed for the growth of this institution for the past 150 years. We're also obligated to reflect on and actively address these histories and the role the university has played in shaping them. And this acknowledgement and centering of Native peoples and our Native students is a start as this institution here in Illinois moves forward for the next 150 years.
Hi, everybody. This is Sandra LaFleur, and I'm with Miami-Dade College here in South Florida, Miami-Dade. And at Miami-Dade College, we acknowledge the Indigenous peoples on whose land we stand. The Miccosukee and the Seminole tribes who remain unconquered, and the Tequesta tribe who first occupied the land that is now downtown Miami, and so represent ties to both our prehistoric and our historic pasts. Miami-Dade College is grateful for the unique knowledge and ways of being, as well as the profound connection to our South Florida ecosystems that these Indigenous tribes represent. We look forward to strengthening our relationship with both Miami's Indigenous peoples as well as with our natural world.
Thanks, everyone. Before we get started, we also want to acknowledge that we're all living through unprecedented times, and that life and work as we know it has been changing, will continue to change. And that's also true for the way that we think about evaluation. And so while what we'll be sharing in kind of the initial panel conversations is about what we've experienced to date, the way this work may look may need to continue to change. And so we're excited for an opportunity later on when we move into breakout groups to dig a little bit deeper, if your group so chooses, into kind of what COVID means within the context of your work around evaluation. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so as we get started, we wanted to take a moment to invite you all to reflect on your own experience before we jump into our experience with evaluation. So we'd encourage you to grab a piece of paper, a pen, or a pencil, and take a few moments to think about why you're here and what brought you into this conversation. So a few questions that we'd suggest taking a moment on, or we'd ask you to take a moment on, are why you're interested in evaluation, what you hope to accomplish with this work. Maybe you're wanting to understand the effects of a new program you're launching. Maybe you're being asked to provide evidence of student learning and the experiences that you already offer. Maybe it's something that's being required of you, but it's important to know, kind of start with why are you here? Also consider your professional context. What your institution, your program, your course, your initiative, and the audience that you're serving, and what that means for the kind of evaluation work you might do. And then also consider how you're currently engaging in evaluation. Maybe you're not, maybe you're a skeptic, but you wanted to learn a little bit more. Maybe you're just getting started, and so you're thinking about those early goals that you might want to evaluate. Or maybe you're crunching the data and starting to think about what you've learned and how you want to draw on that as you move forward in your evaluation practice. And so we'll offer a few minutes of quiet time for you to take a few notes. And we'd encourage you to actually write things down, because we'll come back to this later during our breakouts in this session. But panelists, if you have anything else that you want to throw in, please jump in too. All right, so about 5 minutes of reflection. All right, that's been about 5 minutes. And I know that these were big questions in a very short amount of time to respond to them. But we would invite you to continue to reflect on them as we, and as I and the panelists share a little bit about our experience with evaluation. Curious to kind of hear more as we move into conversations later about where you see similarities, or where there are some synergies in kind of your experience and some of the experiences we share, or maybe where you see differences, and if there's takeaways that we can all learn, we can learn from together. And so I invite you to kind of continue to reflect as we move through. But for me, I had the opportunity to spend, in my role with Ashoku, to spend the last few years having conversations with faculty and staff across the network about how they were approaching Changemaker evaluation. And there were many takeaways from the many conversations, because the experiences can be so different. But wanted to share a few trends, or if not trends, maybe common observations, that things that often came out of conversations that people were grappling with, that were on their minds, that people noted as valuable as they were thinking through their own evaluation experience. I think one of the things that I come back to often is navigating differences in definitions for evaluation terminology. I think when it comes to terminology, there are always technical definitions, but because evaluation terms have become educational buzzwords, I think a lot of these terms are also often used pretty fluidly. And so when one person says evaluation, they might be thinking something very different than another person. You may step into a conversation about evaluation and find that some people are thinking about student learning. Some people are thinking about evaluation across the institution, institutional change. Some people are thinking about evaluating the effects of an institution's work in the community, and are thinking about very different approaches to all of these things. And so having shared conversations as a community about terms can be a really powerful first step in building those relationships and that foundation for the work. A second thing that's come up in a lot of the conversations was around putting community at the center of evaluation work. I think that in Changemaker evaluation, as we're implementing this work, it often is a step in the process of helping us to understand our community's experience, but it's often also an opportunity and even an imperative to engage in the community, engage with the community as we move through the evaluation process. And so that looks like bringing together faculty, staff, students, community members as we think about goals for a program at the beginning of an evaluation initiative. It can look like sharing evaluation results with the community so that they understand what's being learned through the process, what's working well, and maybe where there are also opportunities for growth. And it could also look like including students in conversation about evaluation from the beginning to the end of their own learning so that they can see what learning over the course of that process is looking like for them. It's an opportunity for them to more deeply understand their learning experience. Another point is around adapting evaluation practices for context. I think that evaluation is always going to produce the most relevant results when it's responding to the questions that a community are asking, when it's designed to address those questions, and when it's designed in a way that's manageable and accessible within the context that you're working. And then drawing on evaluation to inform action. I think that especially in higher education, the research and the evaluation space, sometimes the purpose of the process is to reduce learning. But I think that within the context of change making, which is a very action-oriented community, ensuring that we can connect what we're learning about through the evaluation process with what's happening in classrooms, what's happening in programs across an institution, in communities, is going to help us even more intentionally pursue the work that's very important to all of us. And so drawing that connection between what we're learning and how it can inform our action has become a common part of a lot of the conversations around Changemaker evaluation. Some of these might resonate with you. I think you'll see some of these manifest differently and as our panelists share about their experience. But I'm excited to hand the conversation over to Abby, who has been leading a process of iterating evaluation practices that PSU is implementing around their online program for social innovation. So over to you, Abby.
Hi, everyone. It's so good to be with you. I'm just having listened to Hattie's short summary of everything she learned working on evaluation with Ashoka U. I think each one of these components showed up in our experience implementing an evaluation for Changemaker education. So I'll just tell you, I just want to mention, we named this course, this session at the Ashoka U Exchange, experiences in evaluating Changemaker education, because we don't have like a consensus internationally around evaluating this work. So we've all had, what we do have is experiences attempting to evaluate it. And I think that's what you'll hear us present today. And the lens that I'm coming from is the School of Business at Portland State University out in Portland, Oregon. And in the School of Business, we have an initiative that has a certificate in social innovation and social entrepreneurship. The certificate is open to graduate and undergraduate students, and it's also open to community members. So we have large classes of about 50 people, and there's 4 classes in the certificate. They're designed to be taken in a sequence that can act as sort of an idea, a very early idea stage incubator, or just a set of skills building exercises. And we position them in both ways and invite participants to experience both outcomes. And when we began this initiative back in 2013, we knew we needed to evaluate it. We had required course evaluations, like many of you might have if you're involved in curricular activities. But the course evaluations were much more about delivery and instructor reviews and not linked to learning outcomes. So our first survey was linked to the learning outcomes, but it was not linked to research on Changemaker skills or evaluating Changemaker education. It was still measuring student satisfaction and not necessarily encouraging self-reflection. It was not connected to best practices in the field. We had just started working with Ashoka U, and at that point we didn't know anyone or We didn't have any peers who we knew were working in evaluating change-making education. And while it was connected to learning outcomes in some ways, it wasn't really connected to the bigger and more fundamental purpose of the Social Innovation and Entrepreneurship Certificate. So after a few years of delivering that evaluation, but getting really kind of dramatic but not super informative responses, like the one you see on this slide right here, where one person said, "This is the most enjoyable course I've ever had," and one person said, "Literally the worst class I've ever had." We stepped back and said, okay, so how do we use these types of feedback to keep improving our course and our series of courses? And what we found in that question was actually that there's some really interesting research on changemaker skills. Like Hattie was describing these address definitions, they address skills that are teachable, they address skills that we're integrating into learning outcomes. And so we didn't eliminate those other course evaluation tools. I'm not trying to discount the value of those evaluation tools. They're critical. But what we did was pair those course evals with a changemaker skills survey. And we developed the survey using the changemaker attributes from a very effective study that we found, that I'm going to put the name of the study in the chat for you all, because I really encourage you to read it. It's a super good read, even if you're not doing course evals. So I'm putting it in the chat for everyone. And it's in research databases, so you'll find it easily with using the name. And what these authors did was that they identified 14 changemaker attributes that we were able to match with our learning outcomes. And we didn't teach every attribute in every class, but we used those attributes to understand where students were learning changemaker skills and where they weren't learning changemaker skills. And what happened wasn't like astounding. We didn't roll this out and find, great, now we know like everybody is more resilient having taken our classes. What we found were really incremental changes. We found, first of all, that if we didn't require the changemaker skills survey in the classes, very, very few students participated. So we changed it to a required component. It was,
thank you.
It wasn't graded, but it was it was required. So once we required it, that helped a lot. And when more people took it, we found incremental changes. We found some small to medium improvements. We found some areas where there was no improvement. And we even found one area where there was negative improvement. And this was insightful. It was, rather than like feeling disappointed about the results, I think what we found was that we hadn't known before that people weren't necessarily feeling more problem solving or values driven having taken this set of courses. And so those were areas that we really needed to focus in the curriculum. And I'm just going to wrap up because we have so much interesting content to go through, but we found a couple of things that I really want to convey. One was that there is really interesting research on these topics. There are a community of peers who are doing this work, and I think sharing these learning outcomes cross-institutionally could lead to some great institutional learning. There's a need to incentivize participation because I don't think it's as evident to a participant why they would take a survey about changemaker skills or learning outcomes, because it serves the organizers so much. So requiring it was really helpful, and offering it over time was really important because we aren't using this as a course eval. We are using this as a student growth evaluation. So having it offered twice over the course of one class was critical to understanding student growth. So it was something that we just did. it wasn't, that might seem obvious, but it wasn't obvious to us at first. And then I think there's just what you'll hear when you speak with our other panelists is that there is a culture and a language around Changemaker attributes, and we weren't taking on culture change at Portland State University. We sort of started with our social innovation certificate as a pilot to see if we can and how we can measure Changemaker skills and attributes. So it was a small, like I mentioned, 40 to 50 students per term. This wasn't like a broad Portland State University, 30,000 students at once. And we hope that we can start matriculating this out into other programs. And I'll stop there and pass on to my other colleagues.
Well, Abby, thank you for sharing that. I'm excited to get to keep going together. So hello, everyone. I'm Noah. I am here not quite in frame in this image, but very close to this at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where I wanted to note that we have two of my colleagues with us here today. So we have Valerie Werpetinsky, who's the leader for Illinois Social Innovation, and Ben Lowe, who is an associate professor of social work. So if you're lucky enough to be in a breakout room with one of them, they will have all kinds of cool background information and have been involved in the processes we're going to talk about. If we jump to the next slide. So to situate this, so the University of Illinois is a large Research One university, a land-grant university. And we're going to talk about one specific, quite intensive program. It is a year-long program called the iVenture Accelerator, which is a 50-week program with about 50 students working on about a dozen different ventures, about a third of which each year are nonprofits. So that's already a somewhat unusual thing that we're blending things like health tech, deep technology, mobile apps, and all kinds of cultural and social startups as well in one program. And the goal of this is we're going to talk about a little bit about the reasons for the first 5 years of this program, the reasons why we've been measuring things, what the goals are, and how we've tried to measure each one. Again, to provide one more example of this sort of work. If we jump to the next slide, please. So here, we don't need to read all of this. The point of this is, it is an in-depth program where students work full-time all summer. Everyone is given a stipend to allow them to work full-time on their own ventures. $10,000 per venture of non-equity money, so it's all grants. Students own all of their own work. And it's a community that works together. We bring in hundreds of people over the course of each year, like serial entrepreneurs, community leaders, nonprofit and government leaders, to support our students in office hours and workshops and all sorts of other things. So it's 50 weeks, 50 students, and it costs about $500,000 a year for this program. So it's quite intensive. It's sort of a capstone style experience, open to all students and all programs at this university. And we'll jump into like the three reasons why we actually wanted to measure things in general. The first is the usual program development, program improvement. But second, in this program, we knew we were very resource constrained at the start. We didn't have enough money to run it for more than 1 year. So we needed to prove that this mattered for our students and in the world, and to be able to tell that story in a compelling way with some background data that mattered, to be able to raise money for this, which in this case meant alumni money primarily. And those were sort of the two primary reasons at the beginning. And now as we've been maturing, it's about joining this conversation that Abby was talking about, where people are being really thoughtful in what does this sort of entrepreneurship and change making and experiential based education, what are we measuring? How is it working? And then comparing that against other variables like venture progress that we have been measuring. So can we jump to the next slide, which is these are the 4 goals of the program, which are probably the only thing that somehow have not changed in the first 5 years. And these are very, very much in order, which for our campus, we found very helpful just to say what goals have primacy over others. right? And the first is individual growth and development of our students as an educational program. The second is venture growth and the social impact that is created by ventures growing, hiring people, nonprofits working in the community. Third is about building that community, the network, strengthening it, bringing more people in, having them more engaged in supporting our students. And then fourth, this is about creating examples and sort of high influence, again, really student examples to broaden the culture of change making. So it's not only white and Asian males who can code a mobile app who we consider as potential change makers, but that it indeed is everyone. And we're going to talk quickly through each one of these. And we're not going to get really tactical here, but I'm going to say like what some of the metrics we're tracking are for each one. So for this broader inclusive culture, that's tricky, right? But our theory of change here is mostly around media and having examples. So that if you're a student and you show up at the university, you see someone who you recognize something meaningful about their experience and your experience, and you see them being a leader and a change maker and building something and being supported. So this, we track media mentions. We actively arrange for conversations between our student ventures and media, both inside the university, but also outside. And we've had many hundreds of external and internal stories about our students over the years as a result of that. But that's primarily about media. You know, they're on the front of the Parents magazine and the Alumni magazine. And within one institution, that starts to matter over time. And can we jump to the next slide to talk a little bit about this goal around networks and community, right? So it's very straightforward, pretty descriptive. We just track who we bring in, the demographics of the people who we bring in, the professional experiences of the people we bring in. And here I'm talking about experts and leaders and entrepreneurs who support our students directly. And we track hours, visits, pretty straightforward. But if you don't track it on the front end, it all disappears very quickly. So we're always encapsulating this. For this, we've used Airtable and a team of student fellows over time. Airtable is a collaborative spreadsheet app that's been really helpful. If we jump to the next slide, we'll talk about venture impact, which is now our number 2 goal as we move back up, right? And so we've had 200 student fellows, right, who worked on 65 different ventures. And this one, this impact is not about educational impact yet, right? It's about the ventures themselves and what they do in the world. And these numbers have changed, and this is a month or 2 old, but this is what we use for external stakeholders. And this is really in the service of our students, because if you see this, you're like, oh yeah, you know, of our student ventures, about a quarter of them have full-time employees by the time they graduate. And yeah, they're more than 50. That number is actually now more than 80 full-time employees that our students have. They're primarily engineers. And for the purpose of our institution in Illinois, they're primarily based in Illinois. So they didn't all decamp to Silicon Valley, for example. And that these students raise money. You know, every year our students raise millions of dollars for their work. And the public figure is now more than $17 million that they've raised. And that is like, it's helpful to convince donors that this is a real thing. It's also very, very helpful in support of our students. If you show this to somebody and say, hey, will you come please spend half-hour troubleshooting with this student team? And and we often speak with successful entrepreneurs. You say like, look, they're real. Take them seriously, please. So this impact is often in service of our top line goal, right? Which is, of course, is individual student learning and development. And for that, we could have spent the entire time talking about one survey instrument we use. We use Qualtrics. If we could jump to the next slide, please, which is summarizing all of them, but I'll speak mostly about the top one, our number 1 goal, individual growth and development. And on this one, we use validated scales to look at a few things. We're interested in so-called entrepreneurial self-efficacy, which is essentially the basket of tools and skills and perspectives that allows one to successfully venture. But we also look at leadership. We also look at mentorship scales, because that's an important part of our theory of change. We need to know, is it working or not? But then we can combine it with the other aspects here to say, hey, look, if your venture has successfully secured a patent, what impact does that have on student learning? And we ask students questions, some homebrew scales that we've been working on about, hey, do you think your venture is going really well? Do you have a lot of, do you have things, do you have momentum? Do you think you will be successful? Are you excited about your venture right now? And this survey is at weeks 0, 10, and 50 of the process. So beginning, middle, and end, roughly. But being able to compare those, like that's where we're really excited about the future for our third overall reason for doing this, which is trying to add back to this conversation that's been helpful to us. That's the overall, those are the goals we have, those are the metrics that we are measuring. And we found that these really change a lot of pieces of how the program works over time. And I'm really excited to get more into that in depth if people are interested. But thank you very much. And I'm excited to hear more examples.
Thanks, Noah. Thanks, Abby. So hi, everyone. Yes, you can hear me. Okay, great. My name is Sandra LaFleur, and I'm the Director of Changemaking Education and Social Innovation here at Miami-Dade College. And we will be talking at this evaluation question from a bit of a different angle. I always feel like we're not worthy when I hear about all of the great work that's being done at PSU, as well as with Noah's team. It's amazing how just in preparation for this session, I learned a lot, and it just validates the importance of understanding the step of envisioning the end in mind, always beginning with the end in mind. And when I think about evaluation and how MDC how our whole team, our whole ecosystem is engaging with this, I look at it from a perspective of what gets measured gets done. And so when we think about evaluation, we tend to think about things at the end that we'll just check and see if we did what we said we would do. But in fact, we tend to take a very holistic perspective when it comes to evaluation, because it's through the lens of evaluation that we can even better design the initiatives and the outputs that we want to put in place so that we can try to achieve the same outcome or the outcomes that are desired. So for Miami-Dade College, our perspective, and I should have put a really nice picture of MDC or a map with our different college campuses. We're an 8-campus college institution, 2 outreach centers. We serve close to 100,000 students a year. And like we all like to say, we serve a very unique population. And so I won't say that, but I will say that who we serve absolutely designed for us how we wanted to go about thinking about change-making education. And so the context question that Hattie put up there at the very beginning is everything. Context matters. Context is everything. So our context is working with a student body that is not coming to school every day full-time. They are juggling lots of different demands. Many of them are working, most of them are working. Many of them are struggling with food insecurity, housing insecurity, lots of other different issues. Their social fabric is a little bit more frail. And so thinking about how and what change-making education means to them, could mean to them, as well as to our faculty and staff, is really something we had to grapple with at the very beginning, at the onset of this work. And evaluation mattered there as well. So for us, building the foundation of what change-making education first meant was how we started. So early on, we started doing focus groups. If you go to the next slide, Hattie, we did a lot of listening. We spent a lot of time trying to define, because at the heart of evaluation, right, is measurement, but you don't measure what you don't know. And so we had to make sure that we were all talking about the same thing. And when I started embarking on this work, it was pretty evident to me that if I asked probably a few hundred people, I wouldn't say 700 or 800 people, but if we had asked 700 or 800 people what change-making meant to them at Miami-Dade College, I would have probably ended up with about 500 different definitions. And that's sort of what we saw. So that's what the data told us. So from the beginning, just to even understand where we were, to be able to chart where we wanted to go, evaluation was a very key framework. So here are some real shots of some of the faculty work groups that we had together, some of the work that we put in to try to digest what Ashoka was putting out there. The resource that Abby spoke to, the one that she sent in the chat, I couldn't agree more. It's one of the best pieces out there. It really helped define and make concrete what actual change-making attributes, characteristics and abilities were or could be, and it's data-driven. So presenting it to our faculty work group and saying, okay, let's think about what we know from the field is being defined as change-making attributes or change-making qualities, abilities, competencies, skills, mindsets. What does it mean to us? Again, context. What could we do with this? We're a predominantly two-year school. We have about 300 plus degrees, but the majority of our students will be with us for 2 years, 2 to 3 years. It's a quick turnaround time. And they're really focused on either figuring out what they need to do to be able to enter the workplace successfully, and or they're getting ready to find their next home institution. So whatever we did in terms of change-making education really had to serve their needs as well as our desires to create this Everyone a Changemaker campus. So we spent a lot of time defining. We arrived at our definition. We did a lot of training on what change-making education is for us. We took it from the students' perspective, what value add was there for them. We took it from the faculty's perspective, what it meant to them and how it could also add to their experience as faculty and instructors at the college. And we also engaged with staff and administrators to understand whether or not they thought they played a role in change-making education, which they obviously do. And they play a huge part because many of our students see many of our staff and administrators for more hours over the course of their time with us at MDC than they do with any one given instructor. So that was really important to us. So on the next slide, I just want to share real quickly, after about 18 months of work and lots of great support from Ashoka, as well as from our faculty work group, MDC landed on its unique set of 4 change-making attributes: empathy, reflection, resilience, and action. And what we do with this is we're really, actually right before we were all sent to go home and work remotely, we had a really great summit planned for over 100 individuals, and we were going to kick off a lot of conversation around what this meant and how this could start to be the way in which our students, our faculty, and our staff could start to talk about what change-making education looks like, and they could find their way into figuring out how their service and their communication and their contact and their engagement and their teaching with students could help promote any one or all of these attributes. And so it helps our whole body of educators find their way under this tent. This was extremely inclusive process. That's why it took so long. It was a very mindful process. We were thinking about how could we find a set of attributes that could play into as many disciplines as we have. We have such a wide variety of disciplines and tracks. And I'm really proud of this work and being part of this group's work. So right now in this communication phase, we've got the t-shirts and the banners and the posters that were going to come out this past month. But the idea to me is more about the students identifying with this, because they're starting to identify this. We put this out there. We started piloting some of this with our students, and the absorption, sort of the understanding and the hunger for more was definitely there. So that really gave us a lot of validation. So now that we've identified, this is now about integrating. And I don't have a slide, you can leave it here, Hattie, but just to give you all an understanding of now the process is about integrating and how do we measure the work. I think in logic, it's very geeky. I think in logic models, and I think in theory of change. So when we think about our inputs and we think about our activities, we're in that space of what kinds of activities from a process and a systems perspective are we undertaking to really embed this into the culture of the college and into as much of the academic, the curricular and co-curricular fabric. So student life is understanding what this means, spending a lot of time with student-facing staff, whether it's academic services, academic advising, student life, getting them to understand, first of all, how they interpret these attributes, what these attributes look like in action, and then how might their engagement with students, either one-on-one or in group, promote these. Same thing happens with faculty. We're creating a lot of faculty. We're in the process of developing faculty professional development modules for faculty that are a little bit still out of the know in terms of what is this change-making education and what exactly does this mean, and helping them identify ways in which they're already promoting some of these abilities through their classrooms, or ways that they can by engaging with some of the research and some of the material that we're producing. So we're in the process of integrating. We have a real big initiative at the college to focus on project-based learning. And this is a great example of how we're looking at the integration of project-based learning and change-making education and they really align well. And being able to not just piggyback, but really integrate with other important college initiatives is, I think, how for us this is going to become sort of part of our culture, and I like to say part of the wallpaper. So regardless of the players that come and go, this is part of the institutional way of doing things. So last slide, if we think about where we are today, I'll just give you a quick anecdote. These are some of our students at our Wolfson campus. This is a nice foam board that they wanted to create and sort of use and promote on social media. The logo, the little 4-piece jigsaw puzzle up there, is how they helped graphically illustrate how these 4 pieces play well together and can also stand on their own. So again, a lot of this is helping us to identify ways that we can measure outputs, a lot of different things that we can check off in terms of service activities and efforts and initiatives, but we will start to move towards evaluating student outcomes. It's just that we're moving slowly. This is a slow moving elephant, but I'm really feeling great about the way that the efforts are being sort of absorbed by the college. What I wanted to leave you with was, you know, Miami-Dade College, with all of this that was going on, as many of you have experienced yourselves, we needed to take a week or two to sort of time out, figure out what we were going to do and prepare to move to distance learning to continue the rest of the spring semester. And as we all sort of came back and started checking in and phoning in from our home offices, our change champions came together and they said, oh, it's so great to see. You know, we have our team leaders on each of the campuses, and these are faculty and administrators. And what really warmed my heart in this soft, smushy way, but from an empirical way, really made me happy, was to hear the clear identification of a change-making identity for the college, for themselves as faculty and for students. They're calling out these attributes. They're able to put real examples of how they're putting them into practice and how they're role modeling it for their students. You could see our students, by the way, 2 of them are wearing our t-shirts. And so this is just how, one way for us, we're really not as advanced as maybe Abby and Noah are in terms of concrete student outcomes yet, but that was not for us where we are. That was not intended for us yet. That's in our future. And I've already gotten a lot of feedback, this exchange on different ways that we can start to measure. So hopefully next year, if there's a similar track, we'll be able to update and share where we are as an institution. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Sandra, and thanks so much to Abby and Noah as well. I think there are quite a few things that I love about all of your presentations. I think that, and also your presentations together, I think that the different approaches you all are taking to your work really effectively help to illustrate what it means to attempt to approach evaluation in a course and course sequence context versus a programmatic context versus a context across an institution. But I think it also really helps to illustrate kind of the different steps in that evaluation cycle. I think kind of really collaboratively establishing those learning goals and ensuring that programming's aligned with those learning goals, because no matter how effective evaluation is, if learning goals aren't in place and effective programming isn't in place, the evaluation isn't going to give you data that's helpful and give you information that's helpful. And then I think walking through the process of aligning evaluation in a way that's going to give you helpful feedback for programming to iterate on, and then also what it means to take that data and make it actionable, to iterate, to share, to bring people into the conversation. And so I really appreciate everything that you all are sharing about the different approaches you're taking on your campuses. So I know we've been talking about a breakout, but we are short on time. If any of you are able to go over and interested in kind of continuing to be a part of the conversation, I got the green light for a little bit of wiggle room on that. But thinking maybe we've had a few questions come in, maybe we can go straight to questions as opposed to that breakout, if panelists are okay with it, and if everyone's okay with it. And then we can think about other ways that everyone can engage with one another around these reflection questions that you began with, kind of moving forward after the panel and beyond the exchange. Panelists or anyone else, do you have any thoughts? Okay, I got a thumbs up. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up some of the questions that people had coming through. And if you have other questions, feel free to send them, or I think that you can probably unmute and chime in too. I think we had a few questions about scaling, offering examples of or sharing specific validated instruments that you're using. Curious if you all have resources or particular tools that you would recommend or that you've developed that you can share.
I just put in the chat, I just exported our survey. So I think it's, you know, we developed it based on other people's research. It's definitely not like protected. So feel free to peruse it. It's a PDF, so you won't find a ton of clickability, but you'll also find that it mirrors the 14 Changemaker attributes in the study I described. But as you look through it, you'll also see we worded our survey questions not only based in research on wording Changemaker attributes, but on wording surveys. So we had two real segments of data that we were working with. One was on survey wording, and one was on Changemaker attribute wording. And so when to these questions about these very personal experiences of empathy, how do you measure if somebody's increasing empathy, for example, we describe it in what we mean. So the eighth attribute in this list is empathy, and the definition in this study is, I seek to understand the perspectives of people different from me. And there are many understandings of what empathy means, and we've asked them to identify as this for the purpose of this survey.
Thanks, Abby. So I'll also chime in. I think, Ashoka, you published late last year a resource called Evaluating Changemaker Education. And it's a compendium of chapters from faculty and staff across our network about how they're approaching evaluation. And the appendix includes tools that they've developed. And so very different approaches to evaluation at the course level, at the course sequence, and longer term program level, and then also thinking about evaluation across the institution. But that's there's more information on Ashoka's website, and that's a resource I'd also encourage you to check out if you're interested in more examples of tools around evaluation. I'll hop to the next. Oh, Noah, did you want to chime in?
I actually wanted to ask Jess, as our Ashoka coordinator, is it possible for us to collect some of the tools we all use and then share them with everyone who attended? Like, can we send them a link to a Google Drive or something on the back end?
Yeah, I think when we share out the recording, we can also share out an additional doc, and that'll include the resources in the chat. So if the panelists or anyone else who's attending, if you want to send me your resource or survey, then I'll make sure that goes out with the recording in about 2 weeks' time. Or you can use the Slack channel, the Slack workspace for the exchange to drop that in. So I'll put all that in the chat. That's a great idea, Noah. Thanks for mentioning that.
Thank you.
So I know, Abby, you touched a bit on the question about empathy. Panelists, feel free to jump in if you have other thoughts on kind of how to measure those difficult to operationalize Changemaker attributes, but also wanted to throw out the question around specifically for Sandra, about sharing around implementation and planning for the approach that you took to developing Changemaker outcomes across the institution.
Well, is there I'm looking for that specific question.
So it says, can you share anything about the PBL you are implementing planning?
Okay, so the PBL, the project-based learning, this is Chris. Chris, the PBL, we have a PBL initiative and a work group at the college. We are working hard to promote this as a high impact teaching practice across the college. And I get to work closely with some of the staff leads on that, and we're still early on in our infancy stage. I wouldn't say infancy, maybe toddler stage there. And so we have teams of faculty that have invested a lot of time and practice in project-based learning inside their own classrooms. And they're building collaboratively sort of a suite of materials to help move project-based learning more into the core of the academic, of the academic system at MDC. And I was able to be part of some of the early training. I've been privy to the conversations, and the team that I particularly lead under Changemaking Education, which happens to be the Institute for Civic Engagement and Democracy and the Earth Ethics Institute, and now a newly formed Jaffer Institute for Interfaith Dialogue and Education. So these are big titles. I'm working with my team to be able to integrate with the PBL team soon enough over the summer to find ways that if for instance, if we're considered maybe subject matter experts and definitely community partner liaisons because we work closely in the field in our communities, then how might we better support faculty who are looking to activate some project-based learning in their class and sort of marry. One of the challenges for me I've felt is that we at our college, and I feel this is the same at many other schools, that there's so many initiatives coming at us. And so it's understandable when people look at all of these things in a very compartmentalized way. Like I either do this or I do this. I participate in that or I participate in this. When in fact, change-making education really lies at the heart of a lot of the different pedagogical initiatives at the college, as well as our student life development, our student development initiatives at the college. So for me and for the team that I get to work with, it's been a matter of integrating into those conversations and saying, this is a lot of the same, how might we support you? How might we help you with advancing the goals? And I'll make a quick plug. Jessica promotes the Million Changemakers campaign, and I visited the website. I think it's the website, the poster set. I think it's one of those websites that has all of the winners and some of the great posters that are up there. And I kept clicking, and there's a website that has a really great, clear, concise set of, it's a definition and some language around what is change-making education, which is sometimes the hardest thing to answer for people. Like, what do you mean by change-making? Like, what is that? Is it something else? Is it a track? Is it a discipline? Is it a degree? Is it a school? And that's exactly what we want to combat. So when I was taking a look at some of that language that I found just a week ago, I was thinking, my goodness, this is exactly what the PBL group is working on. So to be able to demonstrate how we're really talking about a lot of the same things gives both initiatives more fuel and allows faculty to, I think maybe more wholeheartedly like step in or realize, oh, I'm already doing this. So I can identify as a change-making faculty, which students, I think, have a very easy time identifying with change-making. It's an aspirational, inspirational thing, but now it's our job to sort of meet them on the other side to say, okay, if this is motivating you, here are some ways that you can link into certain classes and certain professors, certain clubs that can help meet that, sort of map your change-making journey while you're here at Miami-Dade College. So it's just about getting all of these pieces to fit, but we're really early on, back to the PBL, we're really early on, but happy to give you my information and we can stay in touch so we can share lessons.
Thank you very much, Sandra. That's really great. And it's I totally hear you on the importance of aligning a lot of these initiatives so it's not a duplication of effort, and so it's a kind of a uniform front for students to really engage with. So thank you for taking the time to answer that.
Welcome.
So another question that came in from Radovan is, do you visualize that the next step for evaluating change-making could be assessing how systems are changing in the different communities our students are involved in, and how they're participating in the systems change? And so kind of moving beyond or in addition to evaluating, from what I understand, and feel free to chime in, Radovan, but in addition to understanding kind of impact on students, kind of thinking about impact on community or impact on institution.
I look forward to Radovan's presentation on the topic at
Radovan, are you asking this question because of the Changemaker Index session that we had earlier today? because I was thinking about this. I have a quick, I do think it's great to think about this. If we have bodies, if we have groups within the organization, again, our ICED group, Institute for Civic Engagement and Democracy, they're principally our liaison into many community partnerships with organizations that serve as home for a lot of our academic service learning, for instance. There are ways that we can look at community impact, whether or not we could, and we can definitely start to think about linking it back into our efforts as an institution, as well as our students' individual contributions. I would like to say, I'd like to think that there is an opportunity for us to look at systems change, although that's really big and broad. But I feel like I want to say to you, I'm seeing the impact. We haven't yet stopped to measure it. So a quick example is in Miami-Dade County, our students a year and a half ago really got involved in the movement to try to bring early voting sites to our community college campuses. And there was a moment in time where it wasn't going to happen, sort of like the winds were sort of pointing to the fact that it wasn't going to happen and we weren't going to be able to have that opportunity at two of our campuses. And our student body mobilized quickly and got involved, went down to, to the city hall meetings, spoke at the podium, engaged with the city hall manager and the mayor. And that was such a big night for us. Is that systems change? I think it's the beginning. I think this is a great opportunity for us to see some action research begin and get into some of that and start to look at what's happening around us, probably now more than ever with the COVID-19 situation.
I think, so I'll also chime in just a little bit. I think some of the when I first started having conversations about evaluation in my role at the SHOKU, I'd end up in conversations, like I mentioned earlier, where I thought we were talking about the same thing. And as we dug in, everyone was thinking about evaluation really differently. And so we did an early survey of faculty and staff to get a sense of when we said evaluation, what were people actually talking about? What were people expecting? And I think the topics that came up most often were around evaluating student learning, evaluating community impact, how the institution and how students were engaging and impacting kind of in community partnership, and then also evaluating institutional change processes. And so to echo the panelists, I think that have heard a lot of excitement around the idea of moving kind of evaluation and community action research conversations in that direction. And so excited to see where that goes. I think we have the next question that came in, and Jess, feel free to let us know when we should wrap things up, because we can go ahead and wrap up too.
If folks are comfortable staying, feel free to jump off if you need to, but if folks want to hear their answer to their question, the next session doesn't start till 3:45, so happy to keep it going.
Okay, thanks, Jess. So Amani asked, how have you all shown faculty, particularly faculty that don't grasp the importance of change-making education, the value add of the programming or the initiatives that you're leading, and how they bring value, value add of programs for their classrooms and students?
Can I maybe take a first thought at that? Because Amani, I think that it was an existential question for our program at the beginning. And we had no sort of advantages or champions. So we needed to convince people that they should become those, right? And I think what at least we've learned in the last 5 years is that faculty are a lot like external stakeholders in terms of what they value. Like, I would have guessed that faculty had different screens or brought a different level of rigor. I think there have been two questions that are interesting. One, for very cynical faculty who don't believe in experiential learning of any kind, for example, right? Often if you just ask the question, when they come with very aggressive questions, you just ask like, oh, okay, how are you sure your theories of education are working? I've never heard anyone actually give a rigorous answer, and that tends to end that conversation. That's a very tactical and sad and sort of cynical thing to say. But on the other hand, I think our faculty react really positively when we share some of the same metrics about the impact on the students' lives that we're seeing, and that they respond extremely well to stories. Like, the anecdata that we will sneer at, you know, with one hat on. When it's about our students, we love it. So when when students are saying, oh yeah, oh, this student nonprofit has now worked in 19 states with 3,000 girls, teaching them STEM skills, like it almost circumvents all of those questions from faculty in some way. This ended up being a much more cynical comment than I had been planning on making. And of course, they look at our, the courses we teach, they look at those and they're happy when our student evaluations are good. But I think that they respond in the same way the external world would respond, to a larger extent than I would have guessed.
I just wanted to add, I really agree with Noah. I also have had this experience that when people participate in the program in some way, when they have a role, it's like social entrepreneurship. It's like when you see it,
Mm-hmm.
it occur. It makes so much sense, but it is hard to advocate for it when it's theoretical and when it lies outside the traditional walls and disciplines. So I noticed that in social entrepreneurship, and a lot of programs were developed around that, like getting donors involved in, the ventures that they were supporting or whatever. But it happens here too. So we do it in a lot of ways, like having faculty involved as mentors or judges, or having them even just come to events and participate in it and see the way that students take leadership in those ways. They interact with the students who aren't having those same kinds of doubts and questions about the language, and it kind of flips it a little bit. For the students, they're like, obviously I'm using Changemaker skills, and then for the faculty who might have been skeptical, it's a little bit harder to use the like institutional jargon to push back on that.
Hi, Mani. I would add one other thing. I think these are great responses too. And I think we're always trying to build the case for support for faculty that are farthest out from the tent, as we like to say. And the first question that we get asked is, well, how do I know if I'm a change-maker or faculty? And I get all tangled in, like, are you a change-making educator? Are you change-making faculty? And some want to be very quick to make concrete. It means that you teach this kind of class and that you do these kinds of things and that you do 15 hours of that. And that's not the kind of index that we want to land on yet. But so we've put together a little bit of a framework of, to be able to consider yourself as a change-making educator, you need to be able to hit these 3 different dimensions. But really, I think it boils down to being able to speak to the research out there on student success. And some of the most essential key drivers of student success is student retention. And some of those key drivers for student retention is intrinsic motivation, which is something that does emerge when you have courses that speak to something that you care about or helps you understand something that you thought was just part of your lived experience, but not necessarily something that you could do something about. So there are some proximal, not necessarily direct ways, but proximal ways that we can connect dots for faculty to say, if this is in place, then this happens. And if this happens, then this happens. And when this happens, this is really good for students. And when it's really good for students, so on and so forth. The other side to this is, remember when I mentioned about the focus groups that we had early on in the beginning of our, right after we received our first designation as an Ashoka U campus, spent a lot of time with faculty trying to understand their definition of what change-making education was, and both their resistance and the facilitators for it. And one of the things that we learned that we had to keep in mind when we spoke to faculty new to this, or that we thought were new to this, is to highlight that this also allows them to bring more of themselves to the work. We all have personal passions. We all have personal causes, things that we care about on our own time, places that we might donate money to philanthropically, or places that we dedicate our talent to sort of as a side hustle. So how might you bring that into your classroom in a way that promotes change making? And it may not to necessarily push your students to that passion, but to demonstrate to them what it means to care for something and to give of your time, your talent, or your treasure. So it allows maybe for some faculty to say, like, we heard some faculty say, this moving in this direction made me really like my job a little bit better. Like, I remember why I got into teaching in the first place. It's not so much about the tests and the grades and all that stuff. Faculty to faculty, letting faculty tell other faculty is a real great strategy, and using student quotes when they're really moved by the professor's courses, and having faculty talk about that with each other helps us.
Thanks so much, Sandra and everyone. I know Abby has to, or may have just dropped offline. I think she had to shift into another meeting. And I think we actually covered all the questions in the thread. So really appreciate the both of you, Sandra, Noah, Abby, and also Abby for sharing your experiences and leading our conversation about experiences evaluating Changemaker education. Also really appreciate everyone who joined the conversation, and really excited to have opportunities to continue to learn from you all too, because I know that awesome things are happening on your campuses. There are a few recommended resources at the end of the deck in the slide that's up now. Jess also dropped a link to a Slack thread if you want to share additional resources that you've been using around evaluation. So I think that covers it. Thanks everyone so much for joining, and looking forward to continuing the conversation. And panelists, feel free to chime in if you have any last thoughts.
Just wanted to thank you, Hattie, for doing such a wonderful job coordinating this and weaving these threads together. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you all. Thanks, Hattie. Great job.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Have a
Have a great rest of your exchange.
Yes, have a great rest of your exchange. Take care. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.